Hi there, this is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com, and I see G-Man is in the chat. G-Man's in the house.
Hey, G-Man.
Hey, G-Man. This is Stephanie Thomason, S.J., and I'm with Craig Reed, and we're going to do a little bit of a fun video. We are going to evaluate what Rationality rules said about Western civilization. So he is trying to claim that Christianity did not have a very good it didn't have much of an influence on the positive things we see in Western civilization. Was that a fair summary, Craig?
That's a pretty fair summary. We're going to call him out. What are we going to do? We're going to destroy him.
Yes, and that's what we can even change the name of the video to Rationality Rules Destroyed. Okay, so
Debunked. Actually, we should say it's debunked. Isn't that his tagline?
That's
like Jordan Peterson debunked.
Yeah, we'll say it's debunked. That's what we'll say. Okay. Hold on. I'm trying to bring up the screen. I want to share this screen and I'm not the wrong one. Hold on one second. So I'm going to move around here, change these screens around so I can get to the Rationality Rules stream. Hold on. Let's go back to here. Okay, now we see it. I'm going to share that. Now,
put another atheist on the grill, fry him up. Fry him up.
That's what we're going to do. Now, one of the things that I wanted to mention before we start was you had pointed out some pretty good things in your last video that I watched. You talked about a lot of the art and the architecture and some of the beautiful things that you see in Europe. And you mentioned, I think you mentioned Italy as being one place where you yourself had gone and visited and noted some art that was attributable to Christians. Did you want to share any of that before we start?
Yeah, sure. I don't remember exactly what I cited in the video, but when I was 21, I went to Florence, studied Italian for 5 weeks. And there's a little town, maybe this is what I mentioned, but there's a little town outside of Florence called San Gimignano, which is like, Florence is awesome, but Florence is a really big tourist, like really touristy. San Gimignano is about an hour away, and I had a girlfriend at the time. From Vienna, and we took a car and we drove. We stayed overnight on a beach in Italy, and then we went to San Gimignano, or maybe we went to San Gimignano and then we stayed overnight. But there's a church right in the middle of the town, and it's like basically like a 16th century medieval village that's still more or less intact, and it's just unbelievable because you see all these frescoes. You know, you read in books about Renaissance masterpieces, but you don't realize until you go to Italy that a lot of these things are still hanging in their original context. Like they're actually famous paintings where they were painted, like the person painted it at that church. So there's all these frescoes in this one room that are like, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's mind-boggling, and they're right there in front of you, where in their original context. So.
That's interesting. I want to say there's a little clicking noise coming in. I don't know if that's from your end or my end, but I do hear that. I don't know if there's something that either one of us or both of us need to do to change that. But you know what you reminded me of when I was listening to that is I read this book when I was in the PhD program called The Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism by Max Weber. And he'd written this book back about 100 years ago or so, at right around the turn of the last century. I think it was around 1920 or 1930 that it came out. But he wrote the book, and he basically talked a lot about the way that America was thriving on capitalism, and then this was attributable to Protestantism. And one thing he had noticed was in Northern Europe, a lot of the churches were much more thrifty. They were much less lavish than what you see in Southern Europe in places such as Italy, as you mentioned, and maybe France even. And so he was saying that was sort of a good thing. And at the time I used to think, yeah, that seems like a good thing. Why throw so much money into the architecture of a church? And I had been at Piazza Duomo in Milan in Italy, and I was blown away. But I still thought it that way. And now looking back on that, I actually have changed my mind, because I'm thinking that architecture is something that lasts through the centuries. It's a way to glorify God, and it gives people the sense of awe. And I think that's a nice way to bring them closer to God.
That's the key. That's something I talk about in my videos a couple different times, because that's one of the first times that I mentioned in other videos that I had what I consider a spiritual experience, that numinous experience, that sense of awe. And that was in that village in San Gimignano. So I was with my girlfriend, and we were on the street, and there was this procession that walked by, this like Roman Catholic procession that was like mind-boggling in its detail. It was these two priests with these kids were holding these poles, and the guy had this lamp of incense that was floating back and forth, and there was about 200 people walking behind him. And I had never, I'm sort of Catholic, like I was raised nominally Catholic, but it never affected me emotionally at all. And this was like stunning. We were both watched like with our jaws open, like this is like, it was so hard to explain that feeling. It was so like, I thought that was the first time that I was like, I guess you would say that was like, it was a spiritual experience in that sense. And
that's great.
Yeah.
That reminds me of Peter Hitchens too. One of the ways that he was brought back to Christianity, he left Christianity, and that's Christopher Hitchens' brother, is because he saw this painting, and the painting was basically of hell.
Oh, yeah.
it scared him. It's like, I don't want that. I don't really think the stick is, the carrot or the stick. Do you give people the incentives to go to heaven, or you focus on the stick? I don't know.
Prior to you becoming a Christian, like you were a Christian, then you walked away, and then you came back, right?
Yeah, I walked away. I was just really a weak Christian in the middle years.
What did you think about hell? Were you like,
I never thought about
enter your consciousness at all?
No, that's the thing. I still don't think about it. The only reason I even ever talk about it is because atheists seem like they think about it a lot.
Yeah, atheists obsess on it. So, I obsessed on it a little when I first became a Christian, but when I was like 25 or 26, I would start to think about it a lot prior to when I came back to Christian, or when I became a Christian. Like I would have these weird dreams that were, I don't know, it's hard to explain. Where like I was at parties that would turn like hellish, and I would wake up like, what on earth was that about?
Wow.
But, yeah, it was pretty strange. Like I'd have weird, and I was interested in it. Like if I was at a bookstore and there was something with like that said like, this guy's thoughts on hell, I'd be drawn to like read about it. But prior to that,
yeah. No, I was thinking about, I've been reading Cy Gart's book, The Works of His Hands. It's a really good book, and Cy mentions a couple of his dreams, and one of them is Cy was hanging off a cliff. And this is right before he came back to Christianity. So he's hanging from a cliff, and he hears this voice that basically tells him, let go, and he's scared to death. I mean, he's just completely scared, hanging from a cliff, thinking if he lets go, he's going to just fall down to the ground and die. And so right. He let go, he listened to the voice, he let go, and all of a sudden the whole scene just flipped over, and he was standing on a surface, and he's like, oh, it's that easy. And that was his kind of a sign that let go of his beliefs in atheism.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Kind of a cool
He thought
dream.
That was a God. Was that prior to him becoming a Christian?
Yeah.
He thought that was a God dream?
Yes, he said he had a couple of them, and I'm only halfway through his book. So he said there was one major dream. I haven't gotten to the major one yet, so I'm excited to get to that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
So should we switch on rationality rules here?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's cook up this atheist. Let's fire up the grill.
Now I'm going to test something.
This mofo.
I want to see if you can hear me because I'm going to hit share computer sound. That's so we can hear the sound of this computer. Hopefully you can still hear me, and let me know if you can't. So I'm going to share that. All right. Okay, so double check we've got that shared. Okay, yes, we do. Can you hear me still?
I can still hear you.
Oh, good. Okay, so here we go. Let's listen to the man. And then when you would like to pause and make a comment, just say pause and I'll pause it.
Okay, deal.
One of the most prominent and pernicious claims that theists, and indeed some atheists, are currently making is that Western civilization is based on Judeo-Christian values.
The values that resonate most with human beings are eternal, not changeable, and not relativistic. They are universal, they are not group-specific. And most of all, they apply to individual human beings, not group labels. And those values were first embedded clearly and concisely in the Ten Commandments.
Our foundational principles, certainly in Western culture, come from Christianity.
Judeo-Christian values are predicated on the existence of a God of morality. The entire Western world, what we call Western civilization, is based on this understanding.
To make a rational argument, you have to start with an initial proposition. Well, the proposition that underlies Western culture is that there's a transcendent morality.
European and American culture, which is based on Judeo-Christian values, is better than other cultures. I think it's uncontroversial to say so.
That was the basic foundation of America. It was a Judeo-Christian ethic. It was a Judeo-Christian reasoning.
The Catholic Church built Western civilization.
Western civilization at large was built upon Christianity. That's a fact.
And yet, this claim is absolute nonsense. And what's worse, it's often not even
nonsense.
It's just an assertion, a statement that straight out ignores history and science. This is Western civilization is based on Judeo-Christian values, debunked.
Okay, so I just wanted to see if you have any thoughts on this so far. I did like his use of all of the people, such as Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, who support the idea that we are going to assert today.
Well, yeah, I mean, he kind of got a pretty good roundhouse of people who would assert that it's not. But the weird part about this, I don't know if I should skip ahead yet, but the weird part about this is that it's inarguable. Like, he says it's debunked, but he's going to go on and like cite all these things. But like, there's nobody listening to this. Not even the most like complete atheist out there that would argue that the Bible wasn't the central, most influential text of Western civilization. I mean, there's nobody else. There's no other book that you would cite that would even come close, like Plato's Republic or anything like that.
No, the Bible's a Guinness Book of World Records. It's the highest selling book of all time.
Right, and there was a time where it was like the only influence in town. So, I mean, we'll talk about it as it goes on, but he never really even makes the case. He just kind of, it's a really, really historically like inept case. I mean, there's no arguing that if you had to list the most prominent books that influence Western civilization, the Bible would be number one by like 50%, and the next would be what? Plato's Republic? I mean, what would be the next book?
That's a good question.
I mean, what could it be? Leviathan, Hobbes? That would be like, that'd be like 1% of the influence. Plato's Republic would be like 5%. The Bible would be like, for a time, it was like the only text in town. So how it can't be the central influence is silly. I mean, it's really, really like inarguable, at least in that aspect. But you can keep going if you want.
I agree. And I was just going to outline a few areas that you and I can talk about. So this is what I would say Christians have influenced: art, architecture, aesthetics, the abolition of slavery, the slavery that we had over here, education, the Colosseum, they abolished the Colosseum, women's rights, because you'll notice women's rights in all Western countries right now are far superior than in many other countries, hospitals, of course, universities mentioning with education, the objective morality, property rights is something that actually has really helped us, and individualism, and the idea that the individual has value. Each person has value. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and put him back on.
Before you start, I second those. That's a good list. There's two that I'll add. Individualism, yes, but that deeper than that. And Sam Harris. This is where like Jordan Peterson makes the argument to Sam Harris that he uses Judeo-Christian ethics, because Sam Harris and almost every atheist have that universalist ethos, the idea that, even outside of our tribe, those people over there are also one of us, that we're all one big human family. That's deeply Christian. And that, I don't think that existed prior to the Bible. I don't think that idea existed in any other, because it's not intrinsic to other cultures. The normal thing back then, I'll just say this briefly, then we can go on. But the normal thing that back then was for, if I were in my tribe, the people outside of my tribe are my enemies. They're the people I'm to defeat. They're the people it's only in the Bible. I think that's the only place it existed in history, I think. I could be wrong about that. But it's really strong in the Bible and even exists in the Old Testament, that how you treat the other outside of the tribe is essential to God's heart. That's not an idea, I think, that appears anywhere else. So
you're right. No, I'll piggyback on what you say really quickly, and that relates to what they call in-group collectivism. So if you go into South American countries, you go into China, a lot of the Asian countries, you're going to find, in Africa, you're going to find very high levels of in-group collectivism. And that's the idea that you favor the in-group to the detriment of the out-group. And it speaks to benevolence, which is the highest value, and universalism is the second one, which also actually does speak to the out-group, that we know we should help out-groups. But what's interesting that I think you'll find, United States has been ranked by different surveys many times as the highest in individualism. But the highest, the countries that rank really high in what they call institutional collectivism, and you'll find those in Northern Europe, for example, that's places where they have a lot of social safety nets and welfare systems are really strong. That is where we're seeing a decline in Christianity today, because this high levels of institutional. People don't need to go to church, or they don't use the church as a form to support themselves. They just think that they have enough of a money coming in from
right. They're trying to transfer it to the government. The government is, yes, exactly. They're transferring some of what used to be attributed to the church. That's where the poor get taken care of and things like that, and the hungry get fed. They're transferring that to the state, and the state is now taking care of it.
Exactly. That's what's going. Okay, so let's go.
Now, it tends to be quite easy to take on this claim because, as just said, that's often all it is, a claim, and so refuting it tends to merely require a swift motion from Hitchens' razor. That which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. But in the few cases in which an argument is actually given, it tends to be in reference to morality, which in effect is the assertion that Western morality is based on the assumption that the Abrahamic God exists.
Most people in this room act out a Judeo-Christian ethic.
Judeo-Christian values are predicated on the existence of a God of morality. The entire Western world, what we call Western civilization, is based on this understanding.
Our foundational principles, certainly in Western culture, come from Christianity.
I'm arguing that the ethic that drives our culture is predicated on the idea of God.
Now, the first thing to be said about most of those who make this assertion is that they are utterly ignoring history before Judaism, and in doing so, they're just expecting us to assume that before its inception, people somehow didn't know that it's wrong to kill, exploit, and steal. That before the Ten Commandments, life was nasty, brutish, and short. But this simply isn't true. Evidence shows that official laws against murder and
Can we stop?
Yes. What do you want to say?
Well, there's a lot to say right there, because the problem with his, can you still hear me?
Oh yeah.
Okay. The problem with him is I guess you can't really say he's straw manning, because he's setting up his own. I guess it's straw manning. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what he's doing that's wrong, but he's not really examining. Like he completely ignored the whole idea of the universalist ethos that someone like Jordan Peterson brings up a lot. And he'll say to Sam Harris, that comes directly out of Christianity, and be correct. He also ignores, he doesn't bring up anywhere in this video, he seems to not know, I guess, that Western civilization was called Christendom for, upwards north of 800 to 1,000 years. It's not like he says it's just an assertion. It's like, that's like mind-bogglingly not true. It's not like he'll take like what Dennis Prager says and he'll say like, so that's an assertion that it's all based on God and that everybody believed in God. But the entirety of Western civilization was, Christianity was part and parcel of it for hundreds of years. It's not an assertion. It's almost everything about our civilization, at least 30% of it, at least, was Christian for a long time. And he doesn't ever even seem to address that or know it or talk about it. Go ahead.
No, that's true. That's true. That's something that he does. And what he's doing right now is kind of reminding me of something. He's saying, well, people must have, of course, known that murder and theft were wrong, and that we needed the Bible to tell us that murder and theft are wrong. And as a Christian, I'm not making that claim that we need the Bible to tell us that murder and theft are wrong. Because as a Christian, I'm looking at the passages in the Bible where God says he planted a conscience in all of us. All 7 billion of us have a conscience, whether or not we have the Bible in front of us. And in our conscience, we know that it's wrong to murder and to steal.
Right, and the Bible even says that. I pointed that out to Paul Gia the other day in Romans 2, where it says, even the Gentiles who do by nature what is right have, that's the verse where it cites the laws written in their hearts. They do by nature, they do the right thing, because it's the right thing to do. But
Whenever I tell people that we follow the golden rule, the whole world knows to follow the golden rule, no matter what your religion is, people say, well, then Christianity didn't make that up. And I said, I never said it did. I didn't say that Christianity made that up. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. It's weird how much he totally disregards in this video. Like, there's so much that he doesn't even bring to the table. And he says, like, the idea that our civilization is predicated on Judeo-Christian values and ethics is an assertion. It's more or less almost a fact. I mean, nobody would argue that the Bible is the most prominent text by far in our civilization. By far, nobody would argue that. Nobody, and no sane person would ever argue that. And the society that he is a part of emerged out of Christendom, Christianity. Now, you can make a reasonable argument that not all those values are based on the Bible, which is what he's going to do. But the fact that it's not the most prominent influence is absurd. It's absurd. But go ahead, keep going.
I wanted to add something to that, because one of the things that we have changed, so this idea that we have a conscience, that's something that's universal to everybody. But pagans, back during the time of Christ, there's a lot of activities that they were engaging in. I have notes of abortions, infanticides, child abandonment, human sacrifices, and suicides, and especially of female babies. So the females a lot of times were let to go, or they were put out on the roads, that sort of thing. And they were documented by people like Cicero, Polybius, Suetonius, Euripides, Clement of Alexandria, Tertullian, and Lactantius. So these are people in ancient times who documented some of the awful ways that people were treating other people when Jesus came to the scene. We also had, of course, the gladiatorial things in the stadiums. And we also had things like frescoes and household items, bowls and cups. They've excavated those. And they've found that there's evidence from paintings on those bowls and cups of things like women having sex with donkeys and having sex with a bull, and sexual immorality, idolatry, group sex, bestiality, adultery, just everything.
Paul talks about that a lot in the Bible at different towns where, like, they were worshiping pagan sex cults and things like that. I mean, the long and the short of it is, if Christianity is not perfect, if you prior to Christian, it was a civilizing influence on the times. I mean, the times were brutal. He even says in this video a little bit later, you would think by listening to these people that life back then was nasty, brutish, and short. And in fact, it was.
It was.
The fact that he doesn't think it was, that, like,
the average lifespan was no more than, I think it was no more than 40 years, if I'm getting I can't remember what I've seen, but people didn't live very long.
He also either disregards or more likely doesn't know, like, the brutalities of, like, for example, ancient Greece. He thinks that he wouldn't want to be a Christian because they're mean to women. They had no rights in ancient Greece. And, the practices of people like the Spartans used to kill their slaves for sport. That was a type of training. The Spartan slaves, when you were hit like 16 or 17, you would go like kill some of the slaves just to, like, sharpen up your murderous skills. I mean, that's true. So he cites other cultures that were infinitely barbaric, and he kind of, like, hypes up the barbarity of Christian culture, which is there, but it was in general a civilizing influence on these other cultures by a lot, not a little, a lot.
I agree. And it reminds me of, I was reading something by Francis Fukuyama. He's got some really good stuff out there. And he was looking at basically one of the treatment of history.
That's the end of history guy, right?
Yeah, the idea, he was talking about a lot of things, but one of them was, one of the reasons why just about every culture did not consider rape immoral was because they just didn't have any rules against it. Women were considered property. So raping a woman was basically just sort of violating a property. It wasn't women weren't considered of any value. And the Bible explicitly outlaws rape. So it's just, that's just another example. And another thing that Francis Fukuyama pointed out that I didn't realize was the church told, I guess, and I don't know exactly what year this was, but the Catholic Church basically said that we cannot marry our cousins. And in other countries in the world, people still marry their cousins. In fact, sometimes they prefer to marry their cousins over people who aren't related to them. And that leads to things like low IQs. And so it was pointed out that people now going into, from some of these countries where they're still doing that, such as Pakistan, when they go into the European countries, it actually kind of hurts them because you've got that history and that heritage coming in.
Right. And then, yes. Should we go forward a little or what?
Yeah. Okay. And I just want to tell everybody, I am watching the chat. I can see the chat from
Who's
my
in the
cell
chat?
phone. Yeah. So I've got, let me say hi to all these people. So I see Iger Television, Jordan Marsky, Dank 22, Gavin Hurlman, Brian Stevens, Slam RN, that's Susan, and so they're all actively. And
Brian
I saw G-Man.
Brian Stevens, I know, but who the rest of these? I don't know anybody else. I know
Oh,
Susan.
yeah?
Susan's a nurse.
Yeah, Susan's the nurse. She's in there. And Gavin Hurlman, he was on my channel not too long ago debating. So he debated Deconverted Man.
Did he win?
I would say so.
Just say yes. Say yes. Deconverted Man killed him. He killed Deconverted Man.
It was destroyed. I don't see Deconverted Man's not in the chat, so I'm just going to say.
By the
way,
was destroyed. Brian Stevens, I did not realize that was you on Twitter. I was chatting with like Sunday night. I didn't recognize your feed. I was only in hindsight. I was like, hey, is that Brian? Brian? That's the Brian who's always
He's back on Twitter. Okay. All right.
Yes.
So, and Hellbound Heathen just joined.
Stephanie's trolling me on Twitter. He was trolling me.
Awesome. All right, here we go. Let's listen to what else he says.
Go for it.
Date back at least 4,400 years to Lagash, Mesopotamia, which of course is 600 years before the birth of Judaism, and that official laws abolishing slavery only date back 200 years, which of course is 3,600 years after Judaism. But since these facts don't fit the Judeo-Christian narrative, let's just ignore them, right? I mean, it's not like Abrahamic religion hasn't ignored and still ignores facts that contradict it, is it?
Those values were first embedded clearly and concisely in the Ten Commandments.
Or to put this all another way, most of those who make this assertion just expect us to believe that an evolved social species somehow didn't evolve social norms, that despite all of the evidence telling us otherwise, such as the fact that wolves, elephants, chimpanzees, rats, bats and whales have all been proven to exhibit moral behaviour, humans for some reason require divine intervention. You know,
I want to add something on that because I think that it's a very common atheist assertion that if we see animals acting in empathetic ways, then that means that God had nothing to do with it. But I would make the opposite claim.
Animals are moral and right. Go ahead.
I'd make the opposite claim. If we see animals acting in empathetic ways, it would suggest that in a survival of the fittest mode, something else is at work here, and maybe God has something to do with animals acting towards each other in very empathetic ways.
That could be. The other thing I want to say about what he just said was, because it's importantly terrible or importantly inept what he does. He takes the weakest possible, the strongest possible version of, Judeo-Christian values and ethics undergird Western civilization. There's a Peterson-esque version, and then there's a weak version. The weak version is the only ones he cites, like Ben Shapiro saying, everything's based on the 10 Commandments. That's a really weak version. The strong version is, there is a transcendent, like, for example, he'll start talking about slavery. Slavery was eradicated in part because if everyone is made in the image of God, then that means everybody is a human being that has value in the sight of God. That's a religious idea that comes directly out of the Bible. Now, once you open up that, then all of the atheists, but the Old Testament is a primer on owning slaves and blah, 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 blah. But so all the Old Testament talks about is how to beat your slaves and how to wreck your slaves and do this to your slaves. The point is there's values that come directly out of Christianity that didn't appear prior. Like when Jesus said, that which you've done to the least of my children, you've done unto me. The idea that we take care of the weak and the broken and the lost is deeply Christian. It didn't exist prior to Christianity. I don't think it existed in the world prior to Christians. Even in the Old Testament, they talk about taking care of the immigrant and loving your neighbor as yourself and including everybody in the world into the realm of your neighbor. I don't think those ideas existed prior to Christianity. I could be wrong. I mean, they might have existed somewhere and they might be in some of the other texts, but they weren't central to the conversation. There was nothing in Roman times that would have told you slavery was ultimately wrong. There's plenty in the Bible that leads you to go, wait, slavery is probably wrong because, slaves are made in the image of God too. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't know if I said that clearly enough, but
no, I think you made that really clear. Just the value of people in the ancient times. You also had the education was only offered to the soldiers, and hospital stays were only offered to soldiers. Regular people weren't given these advanced, this advanced knowledge or that advanced medical help. So that was something that was going on then, but now Christianity ushered in this idea that, hey, let's help everybody. And the Christians were the ones who were out there in the streets.
Everybody is somebody. Everybody has intrinsic value. Even the people who aren't in our tribe, they're all one of us, and they're all the least of God's children have value. That's explicitly stated by Jesus. The least amongst you, you've done to me, the God of the universe. That's black and white. There's no mistaking that. So everybody has value in Christianity. Romans threw people out that weren't, you know, they not only did they have slaves, but they could crucify like 1,000 people at a time. And, you know, but when you get to like the 800s, you have like Vikings, you know, they just go kill the entire village and kill everybody and enslave all the women and burn the place to the ground. So
you're right.
You know, it was it was a moral influence on society, and it was a civilizing influence on the society. And I don't see how that's debatable. Yes, there are a couple of passages here and there that atheists will cite and go, see, it's terrible. But there's thousands more passages that aren't. Go ahead.
Even the idea of slavery, if we go back to some of the people who were the abolitionists, were Christians who tried to stop it. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't people in recent times in past couple hundred years who were trying to use the Bible to support their slavery, but they weren't even considering the fact that in the Bible, it explicitly outlaws this idea of kidnapping people, taking them against their wills and putting them into slavery. And it also explicitly outlaws mistreating your slaves, and it explicitly outlaws a lot of stuff. So that was not something that was common to other cultures. But going back to Christians, the Quakers in the 1700s really protested against slavery. They were some of the first, and there were other Christian groups such as the Baptists and the Methodists. They also were protesting against this idea of slavery. So there were Christian groups who were against it long ago.
Right. Well, the idea that the downtrodden person in your society is a human being of equal value in the sight of God, that's an explicitly Christian idea. I don't know. That's an idea that we all take as commonplace nowadays, and atheists agree with generally. Like, you know, the poor person struggling is a valuable, intrinsically valuable human being. But that's an explicitly Christian idea, and I'm not sure that it existed outside of Christianity at all. We take it as a given nowadays, but that's probably because of Christianity, is my point. Right? I mean, is there anything else that says it? Is there any other group of, is there any other group of spiritual text or something that says something like that which you've done the least of my children, you've done unto me? I don't think so. I'm not sure.
That's true. So the last will be first and some of the first will be last.
Yeah.
So a lot of it, meek will inherit the world.
Right. That's what Tom Holland was arguing in that debate. Did you watch that debate, by the way?
No, I didn't. I didn't see Tom Holland.
Oh, that debate is really good. But that's what he's arguing, that, Romans didn't care about human life at all, unless you were a senator or somebody prominent in the society. Christianity introduces the idea that everybody is God's special little flower.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to push it on here.
Go for it.
Here we go. And I want to mention, Brian Stevens did say that was not him on Twitter. It's another Brian Stevens. So.
Oh, thank God. I almost gave that guy props for being you, Brian. Honestly, I was like, wait, is that Brian? Because I like Brian. Brian interacts with you a lot. So I almost went back and started conversing with him, going like, I kind of was a little like, gave him short shrift, but I didn't realize it was, so thank God I didn't.
Some person named the same name. Right.
I think it's worth me doubling down here, because for whatever reason, many seem to have a hard time understanding how human morality could have emerged naturally, when it's really quite simple. We are sentient beings that have evolved the capacity to feel pain and the desire to avoid it, and our recognition that the best way to achieve this is by cooperating and establishing rules is morality. It's that simple. Morality isn't this mysterious, unfathomable thing. The religious just need it to be. Because, to paraphrase the founding father and second US President John Adams, mystery is a convenient excuse for absurdity. Anyhow, with the question of where do moral values come from answered, I'm convinced that the best way to succinctly address the primary assertion is to first identify Western values, and to then trace back when, where, and why they emerged. And so, let's start with freedom of speech, the very bedrock of a free society, and the right that allows us to enact and defend all other rights. Is this Western value of Judeo-Christian origin? No. Both the Old and New Testament proclaim strict limitations on free speech through primarily blasphemy laws, and until very recently, Jewish and Christian governments declared exactly the same.
He's. What do you think?
Okay, well, that one is an interesting one because free speech, I think, is definitely an important value of our society. I don't know. He makes a couple of assertions that he doesn't back up. There's no blasphemy laws talking about in the Bible, as far as I know. I could be wrong about that, but I don't know that there's any such thing in the Bible. It's not the Quran; it's the Bible. He might be right. I don't know that I can't think of anything offhand where like I can say directly, universal, the idea of each human being having intrinsic worth is deeply Christian. I can't think free speech. I can't think of anything offhand that tells me free speech is definitely Christian or it comes out of Christianity. I've never read any theories on where it actually emerged from. Have you? Do you know any? Like I've never even looked into it. So
I would say that just the idea that Christianity gives us all equal footing. And if we go back to our founding fathers, as Rationality Rule is mentioned, our founding fathers made it quite explicit that all men are created equal. And they also talked about we're all equally able to seek life, liberty, and the pursuit of freedom and justice.
Right.
And so all of these things were something that we gave everyone, and within those rights.
Well, in that
we're endowed with that under our Creator. They mentioned too.
Well, that's the key in that, and I talked about that in my Paul response, because endowed by your Creator means intrinsic. That means it's something that can't be taken away from you. It's given to you by virtue of your birth. It's yours. If it's not given to you by your Creator, then it can be taken away by a human being. That means it's man-given. So it's not an intrinsic right, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Right, and that's what he said, even in the founding fathers. We hold these truths to be self-evident, so they're axiomatic.
Right, but they're also axiomatic and intrinsic. And the only way of saying intrinsic back then was God-given, which means only God can take them away. If they're not God-given, then men can take them away. Then they're not intrinsic. They're not by virtue of you being a human being. So exactly. I don't see how that's what I was trying to say in the Jordan Peterson argument. It's a much more sophisticated argument, though, than Rationality Rules is taking. He's taking the weakest version of it. How right there is the part that's hard to justify under atheism. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying I've never heard anybody do it. How do you have innate, inalienable rights if they're not granted to you by God? What are you predicating them on? You know?
Mm-hmm. That's
genetics, gene pool. You know, what are you actually? There may be an answer. You know, if any smart atheist is listening, there may be an answer, but I don't know what it is. So
that's true. All right, let's go. Here we go.
Go ahead.
Hell, the Inquisition is the antithesis of free speech, as they literally incinerated anyone who didn't share their barbaric, unenlightened beliefs. So far as evidence indicates, the principle of free speech and expression dates back 2,500 years to ancient Athens and the Roman Republic. But true freedom of speech didn't emerge until the early Enlightenment, 1689, with first the British Bill of Rights and shortly after the French Revolution, 3,500 years after Judaism and 1,700 years after Christianity. Moving on.
Have you ever looked at a fly trying to get out because it's trapped in a building and it's smashing its...
What about liberty? You know, the abolition of slavery, and with it the pursuit of happiness. Did this value that so characterizes the West come from Judaism or Christianity? Again, no. The Old and New Testament both explicitly endorse slavery, and in fact provide rules and regulations for several categories of slaves.
That is something that is completely untrue. It does not explicitly endorse slavery. What do you think?
Well, the New Testament doesn't at all. There's
the New Testament. The only slave who's mentioned in the New Testament is Onesimus, and Paul considered him a brother. He put him on equal footing.
Right, and then there's also the passage: "There's neither slave nor Jew, Greek nor free, male or female, all are the same in Christ. Those are the predications for saying that that slavery is corrupt, that each person has value in the sight of God. But the Old Testament, that's a whole thing. I won't go there.
Sorry, my dog.
What was that? What is that?
My dog is my
Chihuahua.
Friend, she's a little. She's either an Irish Terrier or a Schnauzer mix. I don't know exactly what she is, but she's adorable. You can see her tail in the background a little bit. All right, here we go. So we disagree with this statement, and it actually, again, it's kind of like, let me point out, when Jesus talked about divorce, he never said he explicitly endorsed divorce. It would be an equivalency there, because what Jesus said was Moses permitted divorce, but it didn't mean that he wanted to support divorce. It's two very different things. And Jesus made one of the worst things that you could do is to divorce somebody. And he said it was only allowable under cases of sexual immorality. And that tells you how much he hates sexual immorality.
Right. But the other thing is this particular part of his video is just standard issue anti-theism. Let me route it back to the Bible endorses slavery, therefore Bible's terrible. I mean, it's not the central. His whole claim of the video is that it isn't what's the title of the video again? Western civilization is not founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And he kind of ignores the whole idea of what our Western civilization is, and goes to a couple of key cherry-picked points about slavery. That's not the central argument. Do you know what I'm saying? It's one aspect.
Exactly.
But that's a standard issue anti-theist talking point. He makes a really big claim, doesn't back it up with any evidence, and jumps to cherry-picked examples that seem to work in his favor, that are basically standard issue anti-theists.
Exactly.
I won't go so
and of
far
course,
as say,
he ignores the fact that Ivy League universities and some of the major universities in England were founded by Christians. So Christians led these institutions in the first place. So they brought them to
all of learning in like 800 and 700. Every monastery, the only reason there are any books that he reads is because Christians kept them going. He's never read any of the things like how the Irish saved civilization or any books like that. He was one of the people. I made a video about how atheist research, YouTube video research, isn't research, because he makes really spacious, big, huge claims that would take him 15 to 20 years to research thoroughly to come with any authority on the subject. And he researches them like 3 weeks before he makes his video and goes, I've thoroughly researched this. It's like almost a joke. It's like ridiculous. I could list 50 books that he's never read that are central to this. I sincerely doubt he's read how the Irish saved civilization. It's all about how the monks, if there weren't monks translating the Greek text and writing that all down, we wouldn't have them transcribing it and preserving it. So just right there, he's wrong. If it weren't for the monks, there'd be no Greek philosophy, because they were the ones who transcribed it by hand. So there you go.
Yeah, no, okay, let's.
Debunked. We're destroying him. We're destroying him.
And Christians enacted and upheld during the vast majority of their time in power. The truth of the matter is that the principle of liberty dates back, again, 2,500 years to Athens.
Let's just point out that the principle of liberty might have been around, but people weren't exactly free when they were told to go into the stadiums and march them in there as slaves and be eaten by big lions and all kinds of animals.
Right. They had slaves in there, so.
And also Christians. Now let's think about how Nero treated Christians. And in the first few hundred years, Christians had zero legal rights. They had no legal protections.
Exactly.
And so many Christians were thrown into the stadiums to be mauled by lions and that kind of thing.
So
and I have support for that. I've got research that supports that.
They've been persecuting us from day one. They're still persecuting us today.
Yeah, and only in the first 300 years, I think we can make a really good, he can go back and he can talk about the Inquisition, and people could of course talk about other things that are like that. But note that religious wars only comprised about 2% of all of humanity's wars, and people have been treated under certain leaders since today. So Seigart compiled that little statistic, but it just looks at things like what went on in the last century under atheist communist regimes. And so it just millions and millions and millions of people died. But if we go back, there's just a very small percentage of people who died as witches or under these other sorts of things that happened a long time ago. But Christians, I mean, if we talk about the founding of Christianity and compare it to Muslims, Christians were a very peaceful group for the first few hundred years, and they weren't given legal protections, and in many cases they were persecuted. So this idea that there's liberty is hardly, it's not even true.
Well, yeah, and then you can make a case, but that'll start to get into total. I mean, yeah, totally, I agree.
So you were told that you had to worship a pagan, and if you didn't worship pagans, they got rid of you, essentially, in many cases. So we had that happen under Nero. We had it happen sporadically through the first few hundred years. So here we go.
When the lawgiver Solon abolished debt slavery and freed all Athenian citizens who had formerly been enslaved. But true abolition of slavery didn't occur until the 19th century, 3,600 years after Judaism and 1,800 years after Christianity. Now some, such as Theo Hobson, would argue that since Christianity dominated the West during this time, the abolition of slavery was, and still is, rooted in Judeo-Christian values. But this is as fallacious as asserting that since animal rights first emerged in Hindu culture, therefore animal rights was, and still is, rooted in Hindu values.
I'd like him to name all of the atheists who are abolishing slavery. Have you heard of any atheists who are out there on the forefront of abolishing slavery?
Right, but he also says that he makes this crazily broad assertion. This is as fallacious as, you know, that animal rights came out of Hinduism. First of all, I think that may actually be true. I think that there is a strong correlation or causation between animal rights and Hinduism. Because
well, that's because they believe that they're people who
they
die
could be reincarnated
yes.
as an animal. So
yes.
I think that actually he just said this is a fallacious is something that's probably true. I don't know it for a fact, but my guess is that's probably true. But if you go look, yes, there were, just take the history of the United States, and you can go to England. First of all, there's a really good reason why slavery didn't go down quickly in US versus England, because there was a lot of money to be made with the advent of the cotton gin. Slave owners, that was the biggest economic class in the world at the time. They were the richest group in the world. But so there were Southern slaveholders who used the Bible to justify slavery, but there were also abolitionists, and they used Christianity to justify the ideas that led to abolitionism. It's really clear-cut in England. You know, the guy who was the leading abolitionist was inspired by Christianity. So it's not fallacious at all. It's one way of seeing the message of Jesus is that all people have innate value and they're all children of God, and that includes African slaves. I mean, and then probably a lot of reason why they started to see them as human beings is because a lot of those slaves became Christians. In America, they were Christian, a huge chunk of them. But go ahead.
That's true. And I also always think about the fact that, have you ever noticed how the Bible gives us no physical descriptions of what anybody looks like? So, I mean, sometimes they might say in the Old Testament, they might have said someone's good looking, but in the New Testament, we have no idea what Jesus looked like. We have no idea what the skin color was of the apostles or anything like that. And I think that was very intentional of the authors, because I think that's a way that they could say to bring the Bible in all these different parts of the world where people do vary in skin color, and apply this directly to them and let them picture themselves or their types or people of their looks in those same roles.
Yeah, could be. That could very easily be. I thought we had some. Now I've heard that Moses's wife was African American.
Oh, I didn't know. Does it say that somewhere? Or maybe she came from Ethiopia or something like that?
I don't know. I have that idea in my mind, but I can't think of why I do. I thought I knew that somewhere, but maybe I don't. Go ahead.
I'll have to look into that. Okay, so let's get rationality rules back on.
It's a type of false cause fallacy. Okay, well, what about democracy? The ability to elect and, more importantly, remove our leaders. Surely the West inherited this moral from Judeo-Christian values, right? Again, no, absolutely not. Both the Old and New Testament explicitly endorse theocracy, which...
Let's note that what Jesus said, he said, give to Caesar what is Caesar, give to God what is God. That is basically saying, no, it's not theocracy, Stephen Woodford. You're being incorrect here.
Yeah, totally. That's the whole point of that. Give unto Caesar that which is Caesar, give unto God that which is God. And he says numerous times, my kingdom is not of this earth. My kingdom, I have meat to eat that you know not of. It's very crystal clear in Jesus that his rules are for people who are, is for the kingdom of heaven. It isn't for to rule over other men. So that's totally false, totally and completely false. There's
I
nothing
agree.
in.
It's a separation of church and state. Jesus was the first one to say that.
Give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's go.
Which is a system of government in which one or more people rule in the name of a god or gods. And, surprise, surprise, throughout history, Judaism and Christianity have enforced such a government.
He's not even being real. He's not even being truthful, because if we go into all Western societies today, we don't have any theocracies. We're following Jesus's plan for us. And if you go into Muslim countries, that's where the theocracies are.
Well, it's probably explicit in the Quran about theocracy. I don't know that for a fact, but my guess is it is. And it's pretty explicit in Christianity, and even like Romans 13, where Paul tells you to obey your earthly masters, obey the laws of the land. You know, they were put there by God. People were established by God. So
exactly. So I don't think that this, I think this is a complete straw man. It's not even, but let's just see what else.
For example, in medieval Europe, in which Judeo-Christian values absolutely dominated, the monarch could do whatever they wanted to whoever they wanted without justification, because he had the divine right of kings. The principle of democracy can be traced back.
Because that's, this is a really big problem with this video. The divine right of kings is true. That was a theory of the time, but that has nothing to do with Christianity. That has to do with, you know, that's a ancient idea. You know, Caesar was considered a god, ruler, king. You know, that's going back to Egypt. Egyptian pharaohs were considered partially divine. That's a really, really ancient idea that stuck around in the Middle Ages, but it's not predicated on Christianity at all. It's not, you know, there's in Christianity, God is no respecter of persons. That's the opposite of divine right of kings. The Bible tells you, you know, that which you've done to the least of my children. If you're invited to the wedding, take the last seat, because if you know, take the seat way towards the back, because if you go up to the front and act like you're important, you might not be. There's the exact opposite of those type of ideas in the Bible. So I don't know. He doesn't really, maybe he hasn't really read the Bible, or doesn't really know history well enough to say authoritatively one way or the other, because he kind of throws a whole bunch of hodgepodge of ideas around that aren't necessarily, they don't correlate.
Yeah, you're right. He doesn't have a unifying theme throughout this. He's identified things that he considers wrong over the centuries, and then he's attributed them to Christians. And right, anything that he finds that's right, he says that Christians have nothing to do with. That's what I'm saying.
Right. And it goes back to the YouTube atheist idea of research, because this whole idea would take you 15 years to thoroughly research, to do it any type of justice where you could actually speak with any type of authority on the subject. And his version of researching this video was what, 3 weeks? Where he read, like, you know, I cite these 4
Rational
articles.
Wiki.
Right. And these 4 articles, and like, you've got to dig into those articles and read the books that actually made the articles. I mean, this is silly, you know, this is.
Mm-hmm. I want to recommend for the people who are listening, a book by Alvin Schmidt on how Christianity has changed the world. It's a really, really good book. And he did do his research. He spent the 15 years, as you said, and it's very well put together. And another one is Joel Edmund Anderson has written a book on our history, and how people changed words around, like enlightenment, to try to pretend like this idea of a movement towards secularism was favored at that time. And they tried to separate science from religion and try to pretend like they're distinct. And really, as Cy Gard has noted in his book, Christians had a huge influence in our scientific community.
Oh, totally. The other thing I'll say in his defense, because his videos, some of his videos are good. And when he does like things that you can do a 3-week video on, like, you know, this particular small argument here, this particular small argument there, he's fine. But you can't do this sweeping type of, you know, Christianity isn't predicated on Judeo-Christian values at all. Like a sweeping generalization like that involves 1,500 years of history, and not do at least years of research to make any type of statement about it is silly. But some of his videos are fine because they're YouTube. You know, he's not bad when he sticks to some things, but this is just not.
No, I can say, and actually, I should also, he cleaned up a little bit too. He's got a nice short haircut now.
So he's looking good.
No, I'm not like that.
Yeah,
no, I'm not. No, that's not how. No, get out of here.
He looks good.
No, I'm saying
really
you look at him in this video, and he's got that Aaron Ra kind of a look, the long hair and stuff. But he cut his hair shorter, and he got in a debate with Justin Brierley on Unbelievable, and it was a good debate. And he had some, every once in a while, people do make good points on both sides. So we saw some of those in that debate. So.
Yes, we should do. At one point we'll do a dissection of that debate. That debate.
Oh yeah, good. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Back again 2,500 years to Athens, when Cleisthenes reformed their constitution so that randomly selected citizens could assume administrative and judicial offices. However, it wasn't perfect, as citizenship excluded women, slaves, foreigners, non-landowners, and men under the age of 20. Unfortunately, as just mentioned, the principle was buried during medieval Europe, but it saw a significant resurgence in the 18th century due to Enlightenment values, and true democracy, as in all citizens who are mentally capable above the age of 18 being able to vote, was finally established in the 20th century, 3,700 years after Judaism and 1,900 years after Christianity. And while we're on the topic of suffrage, what about equality in general? Equal opportunity for all ethnicities, all...
One of the things that he's going to try to point out is, I'm sure he's going to bring up 1 Timothy 2:12 and try to pretend as if women aren't equal. But let's know who were the first people to make the discovery of the empty tomb? Whom did Jesus give that elevation to? Women.
That's right. Power to the people.
And who, if you go back to the church and you notice who were some of the high church leaders, Phoebe and what's the other one's name? Junia. Those were two high church leaders who were given very elevated leadership positions in churches. So we do have examples of women in leadership roles.
Plus, there's a whole book of Ruth. Remember, there's a whole book devoted.
You're right. Not just Ruth, Esther. Look at how Esther was elevated.
The other thing I wanted to say was the Enlightenment, where this gets really sketchy too, okay? The Enlightenment wasn't blanket, had nothing to do with Christianity. A lot of the key, most prominent Enlightenment thinkers, depends on who you're talking about. Descartes was deeply Christian. There's a whole book of Christian apologetics where he tries to prove God. So it depends. Some of them were anti-clerical, like what's his face? Who's the French guy? Not Rousseau, the other guy. Rousseau was not Christian. Rousseau was kind of anti-Christian. But the guy in between, who's famously anti-clerical, Voltaire, is not necessarily not influenced by Christianity. There's some things about, like his famous quote, the Holy Roman Empire is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. There were some things about his views that were deeply influenced by Christianity. So it's really hard when you get into 16th century Europe, 17th century Europe, 18th century Europe to ferret out the Christian influences, because it's such a deeply ingrained part of the culture. And most of the leading thinkers were at least partially influenced by Christianity. And that's like inarguable. There were some who were anti-Christian, like Rousseau, but not all of them.
And I want to mention a couple of things just to build on that. Nietzsche, an atheist, of course, pointed out the fact that if God is dead, what's going to happen is going to be detrimental. So he really portended some of the things that occurred under Stalin in Russia and under Mao Zedong in China and under in Cambodia under Pol Pot. He sort of prophesied that stuff in a way, because he was able to figure out what would happen. And 120 million people died under those horrible regimes where they tried to eliminate God from the public eye. They got rid of a lot of churches during that time.
He actually, he did prophesy it in a way. Rivers of blood. I mean, that's when if you even read some of I think it's Jeffrey Williams cites it in his blog. There's an atheist who was just talking about that. But yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, Jeffrey Will. Yeah, he's in the chat, by the way.
Oh, is he really?
Purple Pill Philosophy. I'm trying to see who else I see. Yeah, Jeff is there. Abraham Girl, Moshi MYY, Dalton Horton. Hi, everybody.
Ask Jeff. Jeff, do you really not know who Kanye West is? He said that on that tweet the other day. Because you're a fan of music, right? You cite Beethoven and Bach in your blogs. I'm assuming are you not a rap fan? Did he answer?
He hasn't yet. I'll keep monitoring it though.
Okay, well,
No, that's
tell him,
good.
Jeff, if you hear this, I'll show you some of Kanye West. If you're a fan of rap, Kanye West is actually great musically, great, and you should like him. If you don't really, he said it in the tweet. He said, "Who's Kanye West?" I wasn't sure if he was kidding or not. Yeah,
I think he's got to be kidding. All right,
well,
here we go.
If you read his blogs, he's a big fan of Beethoven and Bach. Go ahead.
And let's talk about the Christian influence on music too.
Oh,
People were trying to put out some beautiful stuff back in those centuries.
Bach is like Christian classical. Bach is like the Newsboys of
beautiful paintings, amazing architecture. A lot of that stuff came out of people wanting to glorify God in their own artistic ways.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so let's see what he's going to say about women. And of course, I totally take, this is so crazy.
Sexes, all classes, all ages, and all sexual preferences. Was this beacon of freedom and equality a gift from Judaism or Christianity? Again, no. Judeo-Christian edicts fervently oppose such equality, demanding the subordination of women, the execution of homosexuals, and, as already mentioned, the endorsement of slavery and the execution of blasphemers.
Let's note that in the Old Testament, which is Mosaic law, the culture was much different. It was an ancient culture. People did not operate under those assertions under Jesus. When Jesus came, he fulfilled the law. We no longer go back to Leviticus, but this is dragged out by atheists time and again to try to pretend that Christians today are stoning homosexuals to death. This isn't happening. You know? Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, but that's also the argument for slavery. I mean, if Christians today, if there was such a thing as slave-holding Christians today, then you could make a reasonable argument, okay, Christianity, you know, but there aren't. And the scriptures that they dig out to justify their condemnation of the Bible are esoteric, rarely talked about, rarely thought about scriptures. They're not central in any church across the country. They're not written in the church when you walk in the door. They're ones that the atheists went digging for. You know, if the atheists weren't bringing them up, most people wouldn't even know they were there. My wife certainly wouldn't. Go ahead.
No, that's true. I wouldn't. That's how I found out. I actually decided I better read the whole Bible not too long ago, a couple of years ago, because I wanted to be able to counter this. One of the arguments that they bring up a lot of times is they talk about iron chariots. And there's a situation where basically the Israelites lost in a war, and they said that they were defeated by people on iron chariots. And it made me, and they said that God should have won that. God was with the Israelites. And so I went back and looked at the whole context, and God allowed them. In many cases, God gave the Israelites to the enemies because the Israelites were doing the wrong
sinful.
things. But they won't tell you that in their iron chariots thing. This is totally intentional if you read the context, but yet they'll pretend like, no, God should have won that one. He lost. So that's just, all right, let's see what else he's got to say.
And so, again, it's no surprise that medieval Europe embodied precisely just that. Now, I could go on by tracing back the foundation of all Western values and practices, such as Easter and Christmas, which are both pagan festivals that have been appropriated by Christianity.
Whoa! Did you hear that, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, but okay, go ahead.
We can say, yes, there are some pagan contributions or some pagan beliefs were sort of integrated in with some of that kind of stuff. But we still, of course, celebrate the birth of Christ. And whether people have a Christmas tree or not, that's not really something that's relevant to our celebration of the birth of Christ and how Christmas should be. And then Easter, the idea of Easter eggs and that kind of thing. Again, we celebrate the resurrection, and Easter is just sort of a centralized, in addition to that celebration that and I will say has been influenced by some pagan influences.
Right. I mean, there was mixing of different holidays with things that were around at the time, but I don't know what point he's trying to make there. What point was he actually making?
He says, even it says here, Easter and Christmas, which are both pagan festivals that have been appropriated by Christianity. Well, that's like also saying, well, then how can we celebrate? Right now, we celebrate the Festival of Lights. Jewish people, it's a very minor holiday that they have during Christmas time, but yet they celebrate their holiday during Christmas time and in the Festival of Lights. And some would say, oh, are they trying to appropriate Christian celebrations of Christmas? Or now we have other things, Festivus and these kind of things. So it's kind of silly. I think a lot of times different groups want to celebrate landmark times, and the way we do it is really not a big deal, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. Right. Okay. So Here we go.
but I think I've more than made my point. Western civilization did not emerge from Judeo-Christian values, it emerged despite them. Western civilization was conceived in ancient Athens, and it most flourished during the Age of Enlightenment in direct opposition to Judeo-Christian values. Now, don't get me wrong, I appreciate and acknowledge that many Jews and Christians played a significant role in shaping Western morality, but they didn't do so because of Judeo-Christian values. They did so because of their own evolved moral conscience, which they then projected onto their religion. And that's why, not surprisingly, absolute divine laws are forever changing. Now, just before I wrap up, and on a completely different note, I've got a question for you all. Would you possibly be interested in a card game in which the purpose is to debunk theistic arguments by playing the right fallacies, all while preventing your opponent from doing the same by playing cards such as "That's just a theory"? If so, please let me know, because I have a...
Do you want to play his game? I think we can switch it around and do atheist
Did he actually rate that card game? Did he get that up and running? What was it? You debunk a fallacy and you play it? That sounds like a lame ass game. Sorry, but that's some weak ass card game there.
No, I don't think that he did a very good job in this video of debunking Judeo-Christian influence on Western civilization. I think that if he actually looked at this in a more reasoned way, and he looked at things again like art, architecture, aesthetics, all those ones that I named before, abolitionist, slavery, education, universities, women, hospitals. I mean, we could go on. One thing he keeps saying, though, one thing I did want to point out that he said about morality is God's morality doesn't change. God is a standard against which we judge whether or not people act in moral ways.
Okay.
To say that's fair. I mean, I'd say he said that it's changing, we're evolving. I do believe that society has morally evolved in some ways, but again, we're morally evolving as we learn things through the years to get closer to God. And so trying to be more like Jesus. We were given the standard 2,000 years ago. Now we can see exactly what we can do to try to get towards that. And as you look, Western societies do keep improving in some ways.
Yeah, they definitely do keep improving. I mean, the thing about it to me that's just so obvious is it's not really a serious video. It's a really serious topic, and there are points that can be made along his lines, but you know, he hasn't even come close to bringing enough knowledge to the table to make any type. I mean, this is totally like when he does small ball topics like the one he got in all the trouble for. He's fine because you can research that.
Transgender
you can research
athletes?
that. Yes, you can research that for 3 weeks and be kind of up to par enough to have an opinion. But you can't research a topic this intense for 3 weeks. You have to do 10 years. I mean, he's never read. I sincerely doubt he's read, you know, how the Irish saved Western civilization. I sincerely doubt he's read with any depth. Like he hasn't read Tom Holland's new book. I mean, this is something you have to really dig into in order to make any type of a real idea about. And this isn't even close to like sufficient in terms of mouthing off on the subject. It's really not. That's what I think. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree. I thought this was very light, but I'm glad we covered it, and I'm glad we covered his thoughts. And I think that you and I should do some more evaluations in the chat here. If anyone would like to ask a question, Craig and I can answer.
Yeah.
Any questions anyone has.
Why were we so great? Who asked that? We were so great on this particular topic.
Or if they have a suggestion on anybody that we should cover in our next chat. Now, I've now made several videos on rationality rules. I probably need to give that guy a break.
Well, here are my suggestions and see if anybody votes. What were the ones I suggested you? We do the Matt Dillahunty.
Oh, Aaron Ra.
Aaron Ra on faith.
Matt Dillahunty.
The Aaron Ra one where he's got Dan Barker as his theologian. I love that. This was my theologian, Dan Barker. He's here. Tell me what I want to hear, Dan. Tell me exactly what I want to hear. Oh, you're right about this. And then what was the other one I suggested? The Matt Dillahunty.
Aaron Ra. Yeah, the inspiring philosophy debate. That's a good one. And then we talked about Justin Brierley with this one, with rationality rules.
Yeah, any of those would be fun. Any of those would be cool. So whichever one you want to do next. Is anybody voting?
No, I'm not seeing any. I'm not
Hey,
seeing
you know,
any
we
votes.
should, it also might be fun to do the Kanye West at Joel Osteen, like something more.
Hey,
he
let's
does
do
his-
that. Let's do that. Is that on film somewhere that we can review
Yes,
it?
yes, he was there last Sunday. My wife and I watched a lot of it live.
I
We
didn't know it
watched
was
the music
okay.
live.
That's right, because it's on
The-
TV. He has it on. Okay.
Yeah, the music.
My
The
husband-
music is great.
My dad is always joking. I mean, my dad's not. My dad's a very weak Christian, but he likes joking around about Joel Osteen. He's got something right. I mean, he's got a $10 million house.
Yeah, exactly. He's got 70,000. I think he's got the biggest church in the country. That would be a fun one. We could do that. That's topical.
That would be good. Yeah, we should probably do that. So next week, I know we've got Thanksgiving, but maybe in a couple of weeks, we'll have to plan another one. And if anyone wants to join us in these kind of chats, we'd love that. Somebody in the chat, Richie, what was that? Richie Bam Bam is saying Matt versus IP debate, please.
Okay, definitely.
So we could do that too. So that's a good one. And IP, Inspiring Philosophy, I just want to throw him a bone. That guy does an amazing job in debates. I haven't seen a Christian who's been able to stand up to so many very tough atheists in these debates and really hold himself well by focusing on research.
Yeah, the Matt Dillahunty debate, just so everybody who hasn't seen it, that's the first time I've seen, that's the only time I've ever seen Matt Dillahunty lose a debate, and he loses it by a lot, like 100-7. Like he gets almost completely shut out. And all the atheists who watched it agree. You go look at the comments, the atheists, all the atheists are like, can't believe it. The Christian brought all this evidence. I can't believe it. The Christian is the one with all the evidence, and the atheist is just getting smoked.
Yeah. I want to do a shout out here too to G-Man, because G-Man's got a channel. I hope everybody will go over there. I've got a lot of people's channels in my chat, in my discussion, so you can go to people's channels. Craig, you have a channel too. I hope people will go and subscribe to your channel.
Yes, subscribe.
And to G-Man's channel. And I'm trying to see if anyone else in the chat that I know of has a channel, so I can tell everybody to subscribe to theirs, because I'll certainly put links to anyone's channel in my chat if you'd like to direct people to it. So I don't see anything there. Oh, Dank22 says he's never seen Christopher Hitchens lose a debate, but I would say William Lane Craig beat Christopher Hitchens. Would you say that?
I don't know if I've ever actually seen that debate all the way through.
Okay, so I think William Lane Craig has never lost a debate. I would say he is the top debater out of all Christians by a landslide. And when I watch his debates, I'm humbled, because I think you can't even come close to the kind of knowledge he's able to pull right out of nowhere. So. Yeah,
Christopher Hitchens. The only thing I'd say about him is, of the popular atheists, he was the one that I found the most entertaining. I listen to him sometimes just for fun, because I found him, like, he could be really interesting and erudite, and I thought he was really talented as a talker and just a personality.
Yeah,
but I didn't actually watch that debate.
If you want to follow up on anything on Christopher Hitchens, you might want to follow his brother Peter Hitchens, who goes by Clark Micah. That's CLARKE Micah on Twitter, and he is always posting hilarious things. And he says that all Christopher Hitchens flyboys are always coming at him.
Oh yeah.
Craig Nightwolf says that Sean Carroll beat William Lane Craig. So that's his opinion. Okay, so anyway, it looks like we don't have questions that I see here. So I wanted to just say thank you, everyone who's joined us in the chat and who's listened today. Craig and I had a great time doing this. We're going to do it again. And we'll be obviously doing an IP Matt Dillahunty review at one point. We're also going to talk about Kanye West and Joel Osteen. So all this is going to happen soon.
Yes. So get ready.
Craig, did you want to say anything else? Is there anything else you'd like to add where people can find you on Twitter or any other places, or what you have in your plans?
You don't have to find me on Twitter. That's okay. You can subscribe to my channel, Craig Reed. Yes, Craig Reed. That's it. No, we're good. We can. No one has any questions. We can close her down.
Okay, so I'm trying to get back to that screen that I need to get back to. There it is. All right, so everybody, I want to say thank you, everybody who joined today. Really enjoy seeing all of you, and please like and subscribe, and do come again. I'm going to go ahead and end the screen now.